The snow fell on winter's crest not as flakes, but as a relentless, suffocating shroud. For 3 days and nights it descended, silent and implacable, burying the world beneath drifts taller than a man. The familiar contours of the village, the steep pitched roofs of timber cabins, the sturdy stone well house, the crooked fence marking Widow Hilda's herb garden, were swallowed whole, leaving only smooth, deceptive dunes under a leaden sky. Smoke struggled from chimneys, thin gray tendrils against the oppressive white, the only sign that life persisted beneath the frozen blanket. Inside the cramped cabins, the air hung thick with the smell of damp wool, simmering stews, and the low thrum of unease. Winter was always harsh in the northern reaches, but this felt different. This felt like a siege laid by the season itself. Gorb leaned his forehead against the thick, ice-fringed pane of his cabin window. His breath fogged the cold glass, obscuring the white wilderness beyond. He was a man seemingly carved from the same gnarled oak that framed his home, broad-shouldered, thick-limbed, with a face weathered beyond its 40 winters by wind and solitude. Deep-set eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the swirling whiteness. His hand, calloused and scarred from decades handling axe and trap, rested absently on the massive head of the dog pressed against his leg. Ghost. A Siberian husky, pure white save for the faintest gray mask around his startlingly blue eyes. He wasn't truly Gorb's, he'd appeared one brutal winter night 5 years prior, a half-starved pup whimpering at Gorb's door, drawn perhaps by the solitary hunter's reputation, or simply by the faint glow of survival. Gorb had fed him, warmed him, and the dog had never left. Ghost was more than a companion, he was Gorb's shadow, his early warning system, his partner in navigating the treacherous beauty of the frozen woods. Now, Ghost whined softly, a low vibration Gorb felt through his leg, not his ears. The dog's ears were pricked forward, swiveling minutely, nostrils flaring as he tested the air seeping under the door. "Feel it too, boy," Gorb murmured, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Something's off. Too quiet after the storm." The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of held breath, of the world waiting. The usual sounds, the creak of settling snow, the distant cry of a raven, the muffled thump of a neighbor splitting wood, were absent. It was a vacuum, soon to be filled. Vacuum, soon to be filled. The attack came not with fanfare, but with a sudden, shocking eruption of violence that shattered the fragile calm of the snowbound afternoon. Young Tomas, sturdy but barely 16, had volunteered to check the communal woodpile shelter behind the meeting hall. He was bundled thickly, his breath pluming as he trudged through the thigh-deep drift. He reached the lean-to, partially buried but accessible, and began pulling out split logs, stacking them in the sled he dragged behind him. He didn't hear them coming. One moment, the world was muffled white. The next, a snarling gray blur exploded from the snowdrift beside the meeting hall. It hit Tomas like a battering ram, knocking the breath from his lungs and sending him sprawling backwards into the soft snow. The wolf, lean and desperate, its ribs showing beneath its thick winter coat, lunged for his throat. Tomas screamed, a raw sound of pure terror that echoed strangely flat in the dense air, and threw up an arm. Fangs sank deep into the heavy sleeve of his parka, tearing through layers of wool and hide. Before the wolf could wrench its head to find flesh, a deeper, more furious snarl ripped through the air. Ghost materialized like a white wraith from the direction of Gorb's cabin. He didn't bark, he flew, a silent missile of muscle and fury. He crashed into the wolf attacking Tomas, bowling it over in a tangle of snapping teeth and flying snow. Gorb was only seconds behind, bursting from his door, his long hunting spear already leveled. He took in the scene instantly, Tomas scrambling backwards, wide-eyed and bleeding from shallow scratches on his face, Ghost locked in a vicious, snarling duel with the first wolf, and, more terrifyingly, the shapes emerging from the swirling snow around the edges of the clearing. Gray, gaunt forms, eyes glowing with a cold, hungry intelligence. Not one, not two, but 6, 7, more melting into view. A large pack, driven by the deep snow and desperate hunger to the very edge of human habitation. Wolves! Gorb bellowed, the sound carrying with shocking force in the stillness. To arms! Wolves at the meeting hall. He didn't wait. He charged towards Ghost and the struggling wolf. The other wolves hesitated, momentarily confused by the sudden noise and the sight of the large man and his furious dog. Gorb used that hesitation. He didn't aim for the body, he thrust the spear point at the wolf grappling Ghost, aiming for its flank. The tip struck bone with a jarring thud. The wolf yelped, releasing Ghost and twisting away, blood staining the snow. Ghost, instantly disengaged, placed himself squarely between Gorb and the advancing pack, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest, hackles raised like a ridge of white spines. Doors slammed open across the village. Faces appeared, pale with shock, then hardened with grim understanding. Boren, the blacksmith, a bear of a man, emerged wielding his massive hammer. Kalen, the trapper, lean and wiry, held a heavy skinning knife and a hatchet. Even old man Hemlock, nearly blind, shuffled out clutching a rusty boar spear. Women grabbed fire pokers, kitchen knives, anything that could serve as a weapon. Children were pulled screaming inside, doors barred behind them. The wolves didn't flee. Hunger had overridden caution. As the villagers rallied, forming a ragged defensive line near the meeting hall, the pack fanned out. They weren't charging blindly, they were testing, probing, looking for weakness. One darted towards Widow Hilda's cabin, drawn perhaps by the scent of her drying herbs or the chickens she kept in a snow-covered coop. Kalen lunged, his hatchet whistling through the air, forcing the wolf to veer away with a snarl. Another, larger than the rest, a grizzled male with a scar across its muzzle, fixed its yellow eyes on young Alara, who stood frozen near her father, Boren. It gathered itself, muscles bunching under its fur. Gorb saw the intent. Boren. Left, he roared. But it was Ghost who moved first. As the scarred wolf launched, Ghost intercepted it mid-air. The collision was brutal. Teeth flashed, white and red against the snow. Ghost yelped as fangs grazed his shoulder, but he held his ground, his own teeth finding purchase on the wolf's foreleg. Boren's hammer came down like a falling tree, not on the wolf, but on the packed snow inches from its head. The shockwave and the spray of ice startled the beast, breaking its focus. It wrenched free from Ghost with a pained snarl and retreated, limping, back to the pack's periphery. The standoff crackled with tension. The villagers, perhaps 24 able-bodied adults, clustered together, weapons trembling in cold and fear. The wolves, maybe 15 strong now that they'd all emerged, paced restlessly just beyond spear-thrust range, their low growls forming a chilling chorus. Their breath steamed in the frigid air, mingling with the villagers. Hunger radiated from them, a palpable force more terrifying than any snarl. Gorb saw the ribs beneath the thick fur, the desperate calculation in their eyes. This wasn't just predation, it was starvation driving them to madness. Elder Willem, his voice surprisingly steady despite his age, called out, "Hold the line. Don't let them flank us. Gorb. Your dog, he sees them." Gorb kept his spear pointed at the pacing alpha, the scarred male who seemed to direct the others with subtle shifts of his head. Ghost sees everything, Elder. He feels them. He glanced down at the husky. Blood welled from the gash on his shoulder, matting the white fur, but his stance was unwavering, his gaze locked on the alpha. A low whine escaped him, not of pain, but of intense focus. They're waiting for us to break. For fear to crack us open. Hours bled into the gray afternoon. The cold deepened, biting through layers of clothing. Villagers took turns stamping feet, rubbing hands, but weapons never wavered. The wolves continued their patient, unnerving vigil. Occasionally, one would dart forward, feinting an attack, testing the defender's reactions, forcing a spear thrust or a shout, only to melt back into the swirling snow before a blow could land. It was a war of nerves, and the wolves, driven by primal desperation, were winning. Gorb could feel the fatigue settling over his neighbors, the creeping dread that whispered they couldn't hold out forever against the cold and the relentless pressure. As dusk began to stain the sky a bruised purple, the Alpha made its move. Not with a frontal assault, but with cunning. While the main pack maintained their intimidating presence directly in front of the villagers, Gorb saw Ghost's head whip around, a sharp, warning bark tearing from his throat. Gorb followed his gaze. "Flank! They're flanking," he bellowed. 3 wolves, leaner and faster than the others, had used the deep drifts and the long shadow of the smokehouse to creep around the side of the meeting hall. Their target was clear, the weaker southern end of the village line, where Old Man Hemlock and a couple of the younger women stood. They burst from cover, a coordinated rush aimed at breaking through the defenders and reaching the cabins beyond. Panic flared. Hemlock stumbled backwards, his spear wavering. One of the women screamed. But Gorb was already moving, Ghost a white streak beside him. He didn't run towards the flankers, he ran past the main defensive line, towards the well house near the village center. "Ghost! Distract!" Gorb yelled, his voice raw. The Husky understood. He veered away from Gorb and launched himself not at the flanking wolves, but towards the main pack, specifically the Alpha. He moved with astonishing speed, a white blur against the snow, barking ferociously, a high-pitched, challenging yelp. He feinted towards the Alpha, snapping at the air inches from its face, then darted away before the enraged beast could retaliate. He was a ghost, a phantom, drawing the attention of several wolves, including the momentarily furious Alpha. Gorb reached the stone well house. Ignoring the heavy wooden cover, he grabbed the thick rope coiled beside it. It wasn't for drawing water, it was the rope used for lowering and raising the heavy ice-breaking tools. He hauled it out, ignoring the burn in his arms. It was heavy, waterlogged, and frozen stiff in places, but strong. He ran back towards the fray, uncoiling it as he went. The flanking wolves were almost upon Hemlock. Boren was trying to move to intercept, but the main pack, agitated by Ghost's taunting, surged forward, pinning him and others down. Kalen threw his skinning knife, it thudded harmlessly into a drift beside one wolf. Gorb skidded to a halt just behind the embattled defenders. "Drop! Down, now!" he roared at Hemlock and the women near the flank attack. Confused but trusting Gorb's urgency, they threw themselves flat into the snow. Gorb swung the heavy, ice-crusted rope like a whip. He didn't aim for the wolves, he aimed for the deep snowdrift behind them, just as they leaped towards the prone villagers. The thick rope, weighted with ice, slammed into the crest of the drift with tremendous force. It didn't hurt the wolves, but it triggered exactly what Gorb intended, a small avalanche. Tons of unstable, wind-packed snow cascaded down with a soft, deadly whoomph, engulfing the 3 flanking wolves just as they were mid-leap. They vanished beneath the collapsing wave, yelps instantly muffled. Only a flailing paw and a twitching tail remained visible before that too was swallowed. A ragged cheer went up from the villagers. The sudden removal of the flanking threat and the shocking tactic momentarily stunned the main pack. The Alpha, distracted from Ghost, stared at the spot where its packmates had disappeared, a low, uncertain whine escaping it. Gorb didn't pause. He dropped the rope and snatched up his spear again. "Press them. Now. Drive them back." He charged forward, not waiting to see if others followed. Ghost, sensing the shift, broke off his harassment and fell in beside him, matching his stride. Inspired by Gorb's reckless courage and the success of his ploy, Boren roared and surged forward, hammer swinging. Kalen scrambled to retrieve his knife. Others found new strength, shouting, banging spears against shields, or pots, or whatever they had, advancing in a ragged but determined line. The wolves hesitated. The loss of 3 pack members, the sudden aggression from their prey, the eerie effectiveness of the white dog and the grim-faced hunter, it broke their resolve. The Alpha snarled, a sound more of frustration than command, and took a step back. Then another. The pack followed, melting backwards into the twilight gloom, their growls fading into the sighing wind. They disappeared into the snow-laden trees as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind only crimson stains on the pristine white and the heavy silence of shock. The village didn't celebrate. Exhaustion hit them like a physical blow. People slumped where they stood, trembling, weapons slipping from numb fingers. Boren leaned heavily on his hammer, chest heaving. Kalen retrieved his knife, his face grim. Old Man Hemlock was helped up, shaken but unharmed. The women who had thrown themselves down were crying softly, relief mingling with terror. Gorb knelt beside Ghost. The gash on the Husky's shoulder was bleeding freely now, staining the snow beneath him. Ghost whined softly, licking Gorb's hand, his blue eyes fixed on his master's face, filled with trust and the fading adrenaline of the fight. "Good boy, Ghost," Gorb murmured, his voice thick. He tore a strip from his own inner shirt, wincing as the cold air hit his skin, and pressed it firmly against the wound. "Good boy. You saved us today." He looked up at the gathering villagers, their faces pale and etched with the day's horror in the failing light. "They're gone. For now. But they'll be back. Hunger doesn't relent." Elder Willem limped forward, placing a gnarled hand on Gorb's shoulder. "You and your Ghost, you bought us time, Gorb. And you showed us how to fight back. What do we do?" Gorb looked around at the vulnerable village, buried under snow, the cabins dark islands in a frozen sea. The wolves would return. They were desperate, and they now knew winter's crest held food. He saw the fear, but also a new, hard glint of determination in the eyes of Boren, Kalen, even the shaken women. They had survived the first assault. They wouldn't die cowering. "We make this village a fortress," Gorb stated, his voice cutting through the cold air. "We make it hurt them more to attack than to starve. And we use the snow." The night was spent not in rest, but in frantic, desperate preparation. Every scrap of wood, spare planks, broken furniture, even the communal sled, was hauled out. Guided by Gorb and Kalen, who knew the woods and its dangers best, they began constructing barriers. Not walls, there wasn't time or material, but obstacles. They packed snow into dense, hard-packed berms around the perimeter of the central cluster of cabins, creating low walls that would be difficult for wolves to scramble over quickly. Between the berms, they dug deep, narrow trenches, lining the bottoms with sharpened stakes fashioned from chair legs and tool handles, then carefully covering them with a lattice of thin branches and a dusting of fresh snow. Deadfalls were rigged, heavy logs suspended precariously above likely approach paths, triggered by tripwires made of braided sinew. Fire became their ally. Bonfires were lit at key points around the perimeter, fed by precious reserves of dry wood. The flickering light pushed back the oppressive darkness, casting long, dancing shadows that hid the true nature of the defenses and, more importantly, made the wolves wary. Fire was an ancient enemy they instinctively feared. Gorb assigned posts. Boren and the strongest men manned the main approaches near the meeting hall. Kalen and the more agile took positions on the flanks and near the deadfalls. Women and older children formed bucket brigades, keeping kettles of water boiling near the fires. Scalding water could be a potent last-ditch defense. Others kept watch from cabin windows, ready to sound the alarm. Gorb and Ghost patrolled. The Husky's wound had been cleaned and bound tightly by Ilara, who possessed a surprising steadiness with needle and thread. Though stiff, Ghost moved beside Gorb, his senses straining, his nose constantly testing the wind. His whines and subtle shifts in posture were Gorb's early warning system, far more reliable than human eyes in the swirling snow and gloom. The wolves returned just before dawn, when the fires had burned low and human vigilance was at its nadir. They came silently this time, shadows flitting between the trees, their eyes glowing like malevolent coals in the pre-dawn gray. The alpha was there, the scarred male, moving with a limping caution born of the hammer blow and Ghost's teeth. Ghost stiffened beside Gorb, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. He stared fixedly towards the eastern tree line. Gorb raised a hand, a silent signal. Word was passed along the tense line of defenders. Hands tightened on spear hafts and axe handles. Hearts hammered against ribs. The attack wasn't a mass charge. It was infiltration. Wolves, perhaps 5 or 6, attempted to slink through the gaps between the bonfires, using the long shadows cast by the cabins. They moved with predatory grace, low to the ground. One reached the first snow berm. It gathered itself to leap. As it did, Ghost let out a sharp, piercing bark, not towards the wolf, but towards Kalen, hidden near a tripwire. Kalen yanked the cord. A heavy log, suspended in the branches of a pine tree near the berm, swung down with devastating force. It didn't hit the wolf directly, it smashed into the berm itself just as the wolf was in midair. The packed snow exploded outwards. The wolf yelped in surprise, its jump disrupted, and landed awkwardly in the deep drift on the other side. Before it could recover, Boren was there, his hammer descending with a sickening crunch. Another wolf, attempting to navigate between 2 cabins, triggered a hidden tripwire. It wasn't a deadfall, but a net woven from fishing line and sinew, strung taut between 2 posts. The net snapped up, tangling the wolf's legs. It thrashed wildly, snarling and snapping. Before it could free itself, spears thrust down from the cabin windows above, finding vulnerable flesh. A third wolf, bolder, tried a frontal approach near the well house, avoiding the berms. It charged towards a gap between 2 flickering bonfires. As it crossed the open ground, Elara, positioned on the meeting hall roof with a kettle, poured a stream of scalding water. The wolf screamed, an unearthly sound of agony, as the boiling liquid hit its back and flank. It veered off, crashing blindly into a snowdrift, its pained howls echoing terribly. The alpha watched from the tree line, pacing furiously. Its pack was being decimated not by superior strength, but by traps and fire and the cunning of its prey. The element of surprise was gone, replaced by a fortified death trap. The scent of blood, wolf blood, hung heavy in the cold air, mingling with wood smoke and fear. Frustration and desperation warred within the alpha. Its pack was weakened, hungry, facing unexpected resistance. Yet, the scent of human fear, the sight of the vulnerable cabins, was a siren song. With a snarl that seemed to shake the snow from the branches above him, it gathered the remaining wolves, perhaps 8 or 9 now, for one final, coordinated rush. It would lead them itself, straight through the center, towards the largest cabin, where the defenders seemed thickest. Break the strongest point, and the rest would crumble. Gorb saw it coming. He saw the alpha stop its pacing, saw the other wolves tense, gathering behind it. He saw the deadly focus in its yellow eyes, fixed directly on the point where he, Boren, and Elder Willem stood behind a reinforced snow berm near the meeting hall steps. Brace! Gorb roared, planting his feet wide, his spear lowered like a pike. Here they come. All of them. Hold the line. The alpha exploded from the trees, a gray streak of pure fury, the pack surging behind it like a dark tide. They ignored the flanks, ignored the traps, aiming straight for the heart of the village defense. The thunder of their paws on the packed snow was like distant drums of doom. Ghost, beside Gorb, didn't wait. As the alpha closed the last 20 yards, Ghost launched himself over the berm. It wasn't an attack. It was a sacrifice, a distraction. He hit the ground running, not towards the alpha, but across its path, barking frantically, snapping at the legs of the wolves immediately behind their leader. He was a white blur of motion, drawing fangs and snarls away from the main charge for a critical second. The alpha, momentarily distracted by the insolent dog darting at its pack, hesitated. That split second was all Gorb needed. He wasn't aiming for the body. As the alpha bunched its muscles for the final leap over the berm, Gorb thrust his spear not forward, but down, into the snow at the base of the berm right in front of the wolf. The spear tip hit not earth, but ice, the frozen runoff from the well house Gorb had deliberately channeled there earlier. The hardened steel point struck the slick surface and skidded violently. Gorb didn't fight it, he guided it, using the skid, putting his entire weight behind the haft. The spear's shaft slammed horizontally, like a battering ram, into the Alpha's front legs just as it launched. There was a sickening crack. The Alpha's snarl turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony as its legs buckled beneath it. It crashed into the snow berm, tumbling head over heels, a tangle of broken limbs and fury, right at the feet of Boren and Gorb. Chaos erupted. The pack, leaderless and panicked by the Alpha's fall, faltered. Some tried to leap the berm but were met by thrusting spears and Boren's swinging hammer. Others collided with each other. One stumbled into one of the hidden stake pits, its yelp was cut short. Ghost, having done his job, darted back behind the berm, panting heavily, blood seeping anew from his shoulder wound. The Alpha thrashed in the snow at their feet, snapping wildly despite its broken legs, pure rage in its eyes. Boren raised his hammer for the killing blow. "Wait!" Gorb shouted, grabbing Boren's massive arm. He looked down at the crippled beast, then out at the milling, confused pack beyond the berm. They were snarling, snapping at each other, but the fight had gone out of them. The Alpha's agonized howls were a demoralizing dirge. Gorb stepped forward, planting his boot firmly on the Alpha's chest, pinning it down. He raised his spear high, not to strike, but as a symbol. He pointed it towards the pack, then swept it in a wide arc, encompassing the fortified village, the traps, the armed villagers, the crackling fires. He didn't shout, his voice was a low, guttural command that carried over the Alpha's whimpers and the wind. "Leave!" He repeated it, louder, pouring all the authority of survival, all the grim promise of further pain, into the word. "Leave this place. Go." He thrust the spear point towards the dark forest. "Go. Or die here." The pack stared. They saw their leader broken at the feet of the humans. They saw the bristling defenses. They smelled the blood of their own. The desperate hunger warred with the primal instinct for survival. The Alpha's weakening cries tipped the balance point. One wolf, a younger female, turned and slunk back towards the trees. Then another. Then, like a wave receding, the rest followed, melting into the gloom, their tails low, their snarls fading into whimpers. Within moments, only the crippled Alpha remained, writhing weakly under Gorb's boot. The silence that followed was profound. Only the crackle of the fires, the moan of the wind, and the Alpha's pained whimpers broke it. Villagers lowered their weapons, disbelief turning slowly to exhausted relief. Boren lowered his hammer, his chest heaving. Kalen leaned against a post, wiping sweat and snow from his brow. Elara lowered her empty kettle, her hands trembling. Gorb looked down at the Alpha. The fight was gone from its eyes, replaced by pain and the dull acceptance of defeat. He looked at Boren, then at Elder Willem. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sorrowful understanding. This wasn't sport. This was necessity. Gorb raised his spear. The blow was swift and merciful. As the first true light of dawn began to bleed into the eastern sky, painting the snowdrifts in hues of rose and gold, the villagers emerged from their defenses. The immediate terror had passed, but the cost was evident. The snow was churned and stained crimson in places. The body of the Alpha lay still. The broken form of one wolf remained half submerged in a stake pit. Another lay near a bonfire, its fur singed. But winter's crest stood. The cabins, though battered by the storm and the fear, were intact. The people, though exhausted and marked by the ordeal, were alive. Gorb sat on the steps of the meeting hall, cleaning his spear blade with snow. Ghost lay at his feet, his head resting on Gorb's boot, his breathing shallow but steady. Elara knelt beside him, checking his bandage. The wound was deep, but clean. Elder Willem approached, followed by Boren and others. The blacksmith clapped a heavy hand on Gorb's shoulder. "You saved us, Gorb. You and that dog of yours. Gorb shook his head, looking out at the village slowly stirring, at people checking on neighbors, dousing fires, beginning the grim task of clearing the battlefield. We saved us. All of us. Held the line. Built the traps. Poured the water. Fought. He looked down at Ghost, scratching the base of his ears. He just saw what we couldn't. Ghost thumped his tail weakly against the wooden step, his blue eyes fixed on Gorb's face. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last vestiges of the storm clouds, its light glittered on the pristine snow beyond the village perimeter, untouched by violence. The forest stood silent, holding its secrets. The wolves were gone, driven back into the depths of the white wilderness, their desperate gamble failed. Winter still held winter's crest in its frozen grip, but the siege was broken. The villagers moved with a newfound purpose, clearing paths, reinforcing the snow berms, tending wounds, their faces etched with fatigue but also with a hard-won resilience. They had faced the howling darkness and emerged, scarred but unbroken. Gorb stood, stretching stiff muscles. He looked at Ghost. Come on, boy. Let's get you inside by the fire. Your watch is done. He offered his hand. Ghost struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against Gorb's leg. Together, the solitary hunter and his white shadow walked slowly back towards their cabin, leaving bloody footprints in the snow that the rising sun would soon erase, a testament to the night the snow turned red, and the village found its strength. The deep woods might hold other dangers, but for now, under the winter sun, winter's crest breathed again. They had endured the howling.